Thanks very much, John, and thanks for that prayer. Nice way to start. My mother said to me often, keep out of pubs. You don't know what sort of people you're going to meet there. And Mum should know because she started in pubs at the age of 13 playing a piano for the father owned a pub that was out in the bush in Western Australia. I think a pub is a very natural place to talk about theology. I mean, when you go into a bar on a Monday night after a heavy weekend of racing and footy and partying, what do you expect to talk about? He's got it, Sunday's Gospel. Yes? I like the Easter Gospels. They're sort of real. It's like Jesus has done his work and after the resurrection he's giving the final instructions. And the one that makes me sad, however, is the one from Sunday before last, where poor Thomas gets it yet again. You know, I think Thomas, doubting Thomas, has got the worst rap of all the good people in the Gospels. But when you think about it, what was his role? The apostles and the disciples were all in a very confused state. They didn't quite understand all the messages that Jesus had given them about his death, crucifixion, and they heard the body was missing. And you can imagine how confused these people would be. And they start getting reports that Jesus had been seen, firstly by Mary Magdalene and a couple of the apostles. Thomas does what I think any of us would have done. He says, well, I'm not going to believe till I see it. Everybody was confused. And so finally Jesus meets them in that room, and just to add to the confusion, the Gospel specifies that the door is closed and Jesus arrives. That'd spook you a bit, wouldn't it? You don't know what's happened. And yet Thomas was immediately, when he saw him, he said, my Lord and my God. He believed, but he still gets the bad rap. And Jesus said, okay, Thomas, put your fingers in here and your hand on my side. Now, to me, Thomas represented all of us, because if that hadn't happened, and Jesus knows what he's doing, that was always meant to happen and meant to be a story that was handed down through the Gospels to all of us and to our children and so on. Because if that hadn't happened, we'd still be saying, well, what was Jesus after the resurrection? Was he a real man? Why didn't Mary Magdalene recognize him? Why didn't the disciples on the road to Emmaus recognize him? Why didn't Peter and the apostles when they were fishing recognize him? How could he go through doors without opening them? So there was a very real purpose. And Thomas represented us all, like a barrister representing us in a class action. He did what any of us would have wanted to do so that we knew the truth. And maybe I'm a little bit sensitive about poor old Thomas, because on the road that I've taken in the last 8 or 9 years, investigating supernatural phenomenon within this religious, spiritual context, investigating miracles and using science, a number of people have said, why do you do this? Where is your faith? Well, the purpose of it is, and Jesus was the first one to teach us this, when you have faith, yes, you don't need signs, you don't need miracles, but it's the people who don't. You look at the life of Jesus. Why did he do such ostentatious at times miracles? I mean, if he wanted to cure blindness, which he often did, he could have just cured it without saying a word. No more blind people in the world. But each time he did it, it was public, it was for a purpose. He was drawing attention to his divinity, to his teachings, an absolute purpose. Jesus didn't do anything without a purpose. So people say to me today, where is your faith? It's not my faith that they need to worry about. You know, in Australia we've got a Catholic school system which, on paper, is impeccable. Virtually every Catholic child in Australia can go to a Catholic school. And a lot of non-Catholics also go to these schools. So we're in a position to educate our children and their children in the faith. And we've had this for a long, long time. The fact is that at best, 10% of Catholics attend Mass regularly on a Sunday. 10%. Some areas down to 5%. So the need is there, it's very real. My journey in this area started back in 1988. A friend and a former neighbour of mine, Ron Tesoriero, a lawyer, began calling me and telling me about the start of his journey, which was investigating supernatural phenomena. And he'd gone to a country in South America called Bolivia, where he had met a woman who claimed to have the stigmata, who claimed to be getting messages from Jesus. And in the same city, Cochabamba, in Bolivia, there was a statue of Christ, which was bleeding. And I just couldn't believe this. I'd been away from the faith basically since I left school. And I didn't, like most Catholics who wander off, I didn't make a decision to turn my back on God, but that's what I did, without thinking. I thought I was doing okay. So clearly I wasn't thinking. But I couldn't understand what Ron was doing, and got down to almost an argument one day. And I think out of exasperation, he said to me, well, you know, you're supposed to be an investigative journalist, and you're prepared to tell me this doesn't happen without investigating. You're prejudiced. Why don't you have an open mind, investigate, and then tell me what you think? And if it's not true, show us that it's not true. And that started my journey. I now work with Ron and a professor of psychology called Ricardo Castanon, who incidentally came into this whole field of investigation because he was an atheist. As a professor of psychology, he wanted to use psychology to prove there was no God. And specifically in investigating this woman in Bolivia who had the stigmata and got messages from Jesus, he found himself converted. The messages incidentally have the reminder of the church and been thoroughly investigated by theologians. Some of the best stuff I've ever read. Very, very profound, beautifully written, and I mean they come from Jesus. So once you accept that they are from Jesus, you shouldn't be surprised at just how beautiful they are. So I went to Bolivia, and I had an open mind. I wasn't even prepared yet to be a doubting Thomas and test anything. I just watched, and I saw some things that I couldn't understand, couldn't explain, but I didn't give myself away. I didn't own up that there were some things that were really intriguing me. Of course, I didn't see the stigmata at that time, but I saw some amateur footage shot by a friend of this woman, Cardi Rivas, which was very impressive, but it didn't start at the beginning. So I didn't know that the wounds weren't self-inflicted, so I couldn't accept them as evidence, although having met these people, and I mean, when you do these investigations, it's not simply a matter of scientifically investigating the fact, or the alleged fact, but if you look at the type of people they are, you look at their lifestyle, you look at humility, you look at are they making money, are they trying to start a cult, it's a very behavioural thing also. And these people look very very authentic, and especially the spiritual director of this woman, Father Renzo Cecilo, a Salesian priest. You know, I think, you know, I'm not the judge, but it seems to me to be a living saint. He's just a very humble, simple man, and to attend Mass when he says Mass is just it helped me to have a better understanding of the Mass and how it should be for each one of us. And then a series of coincidences. What I thought were coincidences at the time came to me. But looking back, there were too many of them. Firstly, I was in a plane crash when I didn't believe in premonitions, but I absolutely believed the plane was going to crash. And I didn't know how to get out of it, off the plane. And with my plane, I chartered this plane to go to the Sudan out of Kenya. I didn't know how to get out. I mean, basically my pride stopped me from saying, this plane is going to crash. I was with a cameraman who was a friend of mine. We'd been into combat zones together before, and I guess I was afraid that he would think I finally lost my nerve. So I stayed on the plane and took off, and it stalled and started falling and spinning. And the only thought I can remember having was, I was right. But the more relevant fact there is that when the plane took off, and I knew it was going to crash, I said my first prayer in about 35 years. I said, Father, I place myself and my friend Greg in your hands. And, but when the plane crashed, I still wasn't smart enough to realise that God had answered my prayers. I did have the decency to thank him, but then I forgot about it.